Hello, and welcome back to the Strong Collectors Podcast. Today, we have a special guest, Jeremy Girard. He is the Director of Sales and Marketing for Horsemen Studios, and he's here to give us a beginner's guide into Mythic Legions. We're going to talk about what are Mythic Legions, the different categories within that with Mythic Legions, Cosmic Legions, Figura Obscura, and he's going to help us learn how to collect these because it's a little different than what we typically talk about with Marvel Legends and McFarlane type action figures. So he's got a lot of great insight. If you enjoy what you hear on the podcast today, make sure you like, share, subscribe, do all the great things. And without further ado, let's get into the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Yourself?
Doing good. So I'm Dakota. This is Jordan.
Hello, hello.
Dakota and Jordan, nice to meet you both.
Yeah. So this is the Strong Collectors Podcast. We're both pretty new to the Mythic Legion. Well, I don't know. Like I said, I was going to try to not do too much research, but I just pretty much been looking at figures constantly. So
well, I see a few of them over your shoulder.
I got two back there, three of them in front of me. So
okay, yeah. I see a couple. So good.
Yeah. Started growing the collection already. So yeah, I don't know. It didn't take too long.
It tends to happen that way. It's we hear all the time that people get one. A lot of times they get the Powercon debut figures. They get one of those in hand because it's something they recognize, and they start playing around and they're like, wow, this thing is so cool. I got to get more. And they rush out and they try to find, some on one of the retailers or on eBay or something. And we've heard time and time again, people tell us, okay, I just started collecting a month ago and I'm 40 figures deep. It absolutely happens. It's great. It's great to hear that.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. I mean, that's kind of how we started with we way back when we were kids, we'd played with Marvel Legends. Got back into that a little bit, found out people still collected those. We're like, all right, we're getting back into that. And not too much longer, we're full of those.
We're just working our way down figuring out every line we can collect. So
Mythic Legions is our next conquest.
That's right.
There we go. Well, it's a good one. It's a good one to get involved with, if I may say so myself.
Yeah. So, cool. I mean, we're ready to just roll right into it
if
you are.
Yeah, you ask me whatever you want to ask me, and I will be happy to answer what I can.
Awesome. So I guess to start off with, I mean, we're talking to Jeremy, the first and only director of marketing and sales, correct?
Yeah.
So,
I'm the first one that's had this lofty title for Horsemen Studios.
Nice. And so, like, what do you like to collect? I know obviously you probably enjoy Mythic Legions, but
yep.
It looks like you also enjoy collecting guitars, maybe?
No, I do play. Those are actually ukuleles, and I do play. But I've collected action figures for goodness now 25 years probably. I was a child. I was born in 1975, so I was a child of the 80s. So I grew up with all of that like golden age of Transformers, G.I. Joe, Master Universe, Star Wars, things like that were what I grew up on. So back when I was 18 years old, I was actually getting a tattoo, and the tattoo artist had some of the old Kenner Aliens figures, and they blew me away because at that point, I hadn't played with action figures or seen action figures in a number of years, and to see something with that amount of detail, which I mean by today's standards probably isn't dramatic, but back then for me was pretty dramatic. To see some figures from an R-rated property was very surprising, and it got me back into the toy aisles. It got me back collecting. The first figures that I really went deep into as an adult collector were the Spawn figures from McFarlane Toys, and I remember finding wave one of those in Toys R Us and going down that rabbit hole. That led to, the Toy Biz Marvel stuff, which eventually became Marvel Legends, which became, obviously Hasbro took that over. So today I do collect predominantly Legions. Before I started working with Horsemen Studios, I was a massive Legion super fan. I remain a massive Legion super fan, but I'm still buying that. I buy Mezco 112 Collective, specifically their original IP Rumble Society stuff. I do buy the occasional Star Wars Black Series, the occasional Marvel Legends, G.I. Joe Classified, stuff that catches my eye. I mean, recently I was at a show and I picked up the new NECA, the Raphael as Frankenstein, because it was a cool figure. I said, that's super, super cool. So, you know, there's still part of me that does that has a hard time saying no to just a cool looking toy.
Right. Yeah. No, it sounds like a man after my own heart. I mean, like I said, I don't know much about Mythic Legions, but you see, I've got some already.
Right.
I don't need to know much about them. I just need to know they look super cool and they're going to end up on my shelf. So now we're here, so I get to know more about the cool looking toys.
That's the goal today. You brought me on. I'm going to educate you as much as I can on the world of Mythic Legions. Kind of a primer to the realm of Mythos today.
Let's say my mother, if she tunes into this one, how would you break down Mythic Legions to somebody who maybe is just seeing one for the first time and says, that looks cool? What can you tell me?
Sure. So I think there's a few things that you asked about there. I mean, starting with Horsemen Studios. So a lot of, I think, action figure collectors have heard of Horsemen Studios. It's amazing when people find out the breadth of work that they have done over the years, how many figures on people's shelves they have a hand in. So, when they were founded just over about 20 years ago now, it was like 22 years ago, they started doing work for Mattel. So they did a lot of work early on for like the DC superheroes line. One of the things they're known for, of course, is their work on Masters of the Universe, 2000X, and then Masters of the Universe Classics. But over the years, they've done work for Hasbro, they've done work for Sideshow, they've done work for Super 7. They continue to do a lot of work with Super 7 on their Ultimates lines. So they've had their hands in so many different toy properties with toy companies over the years. Along the way, they started doing some of their own figures based on some original IPs. And they did a couple of them over the years, one called Seventh Kingdom, one called Gothtropolis, but it was back in 2014, I believe, 2014, that they introduced Mythic Legions. And they did it at kind of an art show that they held called Toypocalypse in New York. Originally, they were meant to be like 4-inch scale figures, and they were going to use something called the Glyos system, which is kind of a pop and snap system where you can, combine different parts of figures to make different characters and stuff. Around the time that they decided they were going to launch it, they were getting prices from the factory, and the reality was the price of a 4-inch figure and the price of a 7-inch figure were about the same. And this was like 2015, and they were like, you know what, we really think that collectors are moving more towards the 6-inch scale. Clearly, we've seen that now with G.I. Joe Classified and Star Wars Black Series and everything. All these companies that used to do smaller scale figures are getting bigger. So they launched Mythic Legions as a 7-inch line. And for those who are not familiar with what it is, it's a high fantasy line. So it's an original IP. It's not based on a movie or a comic book or a video game. It is something that was created in-house. If you think about your typical kind of fantasy stories, obviously Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, Dungeons and Dragons, it borrows from all of that. It lives comfortably amidst all those worlds. The kinds of races that you have become familiar with, like elves and orcs and goblins, along with knights and barbarians and skeletons, these are all part of the Mythic Legions line. One thing that's been really interesting over the years is there is an riding storyline. There is a story that's happening. It's never been presented in a linear format. It's never been presented as, I just mentioned, a comic or a video game or something, but that's coming. There's a video game that's in development now that we can talk about after if you'd like. There's other things that we're doing, trying to bring that lore together to add a little bit of additional depth to the toys. One interesting part about the figures as well is I mentioned that early on they had the idea of this pop and swap type stuff with this Glio system. When they upscaled to 7 inches, they had to lose the Glio system because it's 4 smaller figures, but they really liked the idea of these figures being modular. So they engineered them so all of the limbs pop off. I mean, a lot of these figures come with alternate heads, removable shoulder armor and such. So right out of the box, there's that ability to swap parts, but being able to swap parts cross figure, that was really important as well. And it's a big part of how the line developed. If you look at the line, especially in those early days, there was a limited parts library to make it feasible to release. The first Kickstarter that funded this was 34 figures. Like, seriously, think about that. An action figure wave with 34 figures in it. Yeah. For series 1. So to do that, they had to smartly reuse this library of parts. And that led to this pop and swap, this customization. And that's kind of how I really got known in the community, because I was a collector, but also a customizer. I was popping and swapping parts. I was doing custom pieces. And that's part of my story of how I came to the attention of the studio and started working with them. But it's also a big part of what has fueled the success of the line and has allowed us now to be, 8 years into the line, multiple waves deep, and nearly 200 figures so far.
Yeah. Wow. So there's a few that we're going to go off of there. I guess the first one will be kind of your start. You kind of mentioned how you got started with 4 Horsemen, but kind of tell us that story, because I think that's a super cool story of how you got your job currently.
So again, I started years ago collecting Spawn figures, and at the time, the design team working on those Spawn figures were the 4 Horsemen. That's where these guys met. They were working for McFarlane Toys. They decided to leave and form their own company. I followed them, their early work. I have all of those early figures. So when they launched the Kickstarter for Mythic Legions, I was an all-in backer. I got everything they offered. So I really started out as a fan, and I started out as a customizer. When they did their second Kickstarter, one of the rewards was called Intern for a Day. So it was an opportunity to actually go to the studio, hang out with them for the day, and get a bit of a behind the scenes look at how everything happens. So I live in Rhode Island. The studio is in New Jersey. It's about 3.5 hours away. And I was like, you know what, that's cool. That's feasible. I think that'd be a really fun experience. So I bought that as my reward level. Of course, I also bought all the figures as well. Sure. And my son and I went and spent a day at 4 Horsemen Studios. By this point, I'd been customizing for a little while, and I was blown away when I got there, and fellow fans knew who I was, and they knew my work. And even more unbelievable, the Horsemen knew me. They knew the work that I had done. So that was really cool. And that was really cool and humbling. And about a month later, I got an email from Cornboy, one of the owners and founders of the company, saying like, hey, Jeremy, we're going to be doing a broadcast where we're going to be debuting a new action figure line. And we're asking, some friends of the studio to come on in and be a part of it. Would you be interested in coming in and showcasing your customs work? So that, again, was mind-blowing, because I was now being invited as a friend of the studio. So clearly I did that. And this was the first G-Con broadcast. The studio was doing online broadcasts before COVID made it a necessity for everybody to do it. Sure. So I went in, I did that. I was part of the day. It was super, super cool. And that's really what kind of started my friendship with the studio. And it eventually led to a conversation where they asked me what I did for a living, and my background was in web design and marketing. So they said, why aren't you helping us with our stuff? And I never wanted to be that guy. I never wanted to say like, oh, you guys really need help, you should hire me to do that. It felt very presumptuous, but they were like, no, you get the line. You approach this from the perspective of a fan and someone that gets what we're trying to accomplish at the studio. So that was in summer of 2019. I gave them a proposal for what I would do to overhaul their marketing and website, and we went forward and we started doing it. And we hear all the time from fans. You were mentioning that you started diving into Mythic Legions. I'm assuming you've used sourcehorseman.com.
Oh yeah, for sure, a lot.
It's a great resource. I built that site. That is really all me doing that site. That is me building the site that I would want as a fan. And we get wonderful feedback from that site from people that use it as a way to deep dive into the line. So I've been working with the studio for a couple years, and as the studios gotten larger and more successful, the line has gotten larger, more and more fans, there's been more and more demands on my time. I stayed on and I was working with them part-time, helping with the digital marketing, writing all the content, and I was doing more with planning shows. And it got to the point where to get to the next level, I needed to commit to this full time. So last November, when we did our annual Legions Con show, we started talking about what a full-time position may look like. And then at the start of this year, I was offered the role of director of sales and marketing, as we said at the start. First time they've actually had someone in that role. And that's what I get to do now. So, not only do I do all of the marketing and all the stuff that I've been doing, but I get to do stuff like this, where I literally get to go on and evangelize for Horsemen Studios in this line that I'm super excited about collecting. So it's just absolutely perfect for me.
That's awesome. And then going back again to what you were saying before with kind of expanding on the story, I know I don't even know how I found this, like it seemed like a one-shot comic book. Is there going to be more comics to come? Because I would love some comics.
I can't say there won't be. The comic's a weird little thing in the Mythic Legions universe, because that was part of the first Kickstarter, and it was one of those projects where there was a team that was brought in to handle that, and there were definitely some challenges with getting it out. It took a little bit longer than expected. So while the comic is a fun, popular little piece, it's at this point a little bit of like a side thing to what's actually going on. There are some other ideas that we are exploring. We recently posted an article where we kind of deep teased that it had an excerpt from an upcoming book volume called The Rise of the Dark Four, Volume 1. So that was kind of our little way of subtly letting fans know that there are things like that in development. But I would definitely not count out more comics in the future. We're consistently looking to grow the brand, do new things, try new avenues to tell the story. So we're all fans of comics ourselves. We'd love to see these characters in that illustrated type format.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the process you talk about, sort of traditionally, right? You have the product or a character, and then you make the toys based on that, where you guys are just creating your own stories and characters and things. Do you find that, is there a difficulty, or is that almost easier to get newer collectors, since they don't necessarily need to know all the backstory for something and can just find it as they get into the characters?
We've heard both sides of that.
Yeah.
We've heard some people say that they had a hard time pulling the trigger on Mythic Legions because they didn't have a connection to it. So they see photos and they're like, well, they look really cool, but I don't know anything about them. And as toy collectors, budgets and space is always at a premium. So to actually commit both of those resources to a new toy line, that's a bit of an undertaking. So we've heard people say that I don't have anything that's drawing me into it. It's one of the reasons why, every year for a number of years, we've done what we call Powercon debut figures, where we go to the Powercon show and we've done, some fun figures that act as, subtle little tributes to characters that other people may recognize. Those act as a great entry point to the line because people do see it and they're like, oh, that's kind of cool. That looks like something I know. So that oftentimes gets them in. But we've heard the opposite as well. We've heard people say that one of the things they love about the line, especially the customizers, is that it is not so firmly rooted in an established story that they don't feel like they can put their own spin on it. I always compare this line, the only other high fantasy toy line that we've had really at length is Lord of the Rings, right? So the Lord of the Rings line from Toy Biz years ago was a massively expansive line. And if you like Lord of the Rings and you love those movies, that's a great line to collect, but you can't look at a figure of Legolas and not see Orlando Bloom, not see that character there. They very much are those characters. It's hard to see that character as a generic elf ranger, where we have an elf ranger in the line that fans can do that with. So I think that it not having that established entertainment property behind it, sometimes it helps, sometimes it hurts. But to me, the really exciting part is once fans do get some of these in hand, they order one, they order two, they order three, they tend to go deeper. They tend to say, wow, I am now sold. How have I not, jumped on these, previously? And then we hear all the time fans say, I started collecting these a month ago and I'm 40 figures deep. I mean, that is a great comment to hear from a growing fan base.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just kind of funny because Dakota and I, we've had that discussion many times where usually if I don't know what it is, I want to research it and then buy it. Whereas Dakota will just say, that looks really cool, and he got it. But what was interesting is as he did that, I started reading some of the backstory and, different blurbs that you guys have on the site. And that gets me to want to collect them more. But I was just kind of curious on, I guess, the duality of that and even the creative process of and maybe it's different, but as far as starting with a design and then maybe doing a character or maybe the story. And then as you do the story, you get the design, or kind of what some insight into that process might be.
It's all different. Different figures have different processes as they come to life. These characters, the realm of Mythos, it is definitely a team effort, but so much of this is out of the head of Eric Treadaway at Horsemen Studios, another one of the owners and founders. Eric is really the one that brainchilded this Mythic Legions and the ongoing story. So sometimes these are characters that he's had in his head for years. Sometimes these are characters that he sketched as a child in a notebook, and he's like, I'm now bringing this character to life. So there are times where that's how it begins, and then the character name and the story and all that comes after. There are times where he just says, I want to do this type of a character. He gets an itch to do a certain type of character, and that's what he does. Other times they are very much rooted in story. So the storyline that we're kind of dealing with right now, I mentioned Rise of the Dark Form. A little bit of the lore of Mythic Legions is this all takes place in an area called the Realm of Mythos. So this is a universe that was created by two different gods, Helios and Selene. Helios grew basically jealous of Selene's attention to the children that she had created, the life that she had created on this world, and he essentially introduced evil into the world. He introduced dark, twisted versions of the life forms that she had created. The worst things that he created were four supremely evil beings, which essentially map to the four horsemen of the apocalypse. So war, pestilence, famine, and death, those four characters. So there are these four dark gods. Erethyr is the personification of war. Alithia, which is a wave that is literally on the water shipping to the factory now, that's the vampires, that's famine and undying thirst. Poxus, which was offered at the end of last year. That's the rotting form of pestilence, of disease. And then finally, at the end of this year, we're going to have a big reveal in November, and that is going to be the fourth of the Horsemen, Death, Necronominus. So these four horrible beings were unleashed on the realm and were eventually banished. They were eventually defeated and banished. In their absence, there were four heroic factions that sprung up and decided to, guard against their return, against the four factions that align to these characters. There's been relative peace for many years, but something has happened to allow the evil forces to recall their masters. So one at a time, they're coming back. Erether, that was the line that we introduced back in 2019, actually. It shipped last year, and that was the return of the first one of these Dark Four. So that general plot line is what we are dealing with right now. That classic kind of good versus evil, all of these different factions that are warring with each other. Are they going to come together for the greater good, or are the evil factions going to come together to finally crush the realm of Mythos? That's a big part of it. So those four evil characters, those were created right up front. They were sketched out. This is what these characters are going to look like. And it's super cool because they were sketched, 9 years ago. I've seen all the product sketches. So to now see, like when I saw the Poxus figure that was solicited first last November, I had seen that artwork years before that. So to finally see that artwork realized as a figure was really, really cool. So to answer your question, the life cycle of these, there's all different ways that they get introduced into the line. And then there's also figures, because the line still uses a lot of parts reuse. There are some lines, some waves that it's just like, hey, let's create some cool figures with the parts we have available. Even something like our annual Legions Con event. So Legions Con is an event totally dedicated to the Legions community. I helped found that event. I helped run it. And we have show figures that are exclusive that debut at Legions Con. They use all existing parts. Those all start as just, hey, let's make some cool figures that we think fans coming to the con are really going to want to walk away with.
Nice. So I guess looking back, like if they've had these four like big characters from the beginning, and we don't even know what the fourth one is yet, I don't know if you know the answer to it, but how did they know, like, we're going to play the long game, we're going to keep these in the bank, and like down the road when this keeps growing, like how do they even know that it's going to keep growing, or do they just have that belief from the start?
I mean, they had that belief, again, the idea was let's put out some cool figures. And that first wave, even though the factions were all named, I mean, even though fans didn't know it at the time, but if you looked at the faction logos, you kind of got to see a little bit of what those characters look like in it. When Erether, who was the first one was revealed, people looked at the faction logo and they were like, hey, that's Erether. Like literally that's his face. So they were revealed kind of a long time ago and fans didn't realize it. But yeah, there was definitely a belief. There was a hope for sure that this line would find the audience that it did. That first Kickstarter, that had the 34 figures, the reason it had so many figures was because it was so successful, was because so many fans backed it and they kept opening stretch goals. And then, I mean, that second big Kickstarter they did for the Advent of Decay wave, that was a 43 figure wave that people just kept throwing money at it and they just kept unlocking more and more tiers.
Wow.
So it's funny, I've seen some of the plans early on how they wanted to roll this out, and it got bigger than they expected faster. So some of the waves that they ended up doing were not part of the original plans, but they were things to help meet the demand. They started putting out stuff, using the parts in different ways, introducing different characters that maybe weren't core to the story, but would make cool toys as they led up to that first reveal, that first Erether wave, which was another high point for the wave. That was the wave that introduced horses. It introduced the first member of the Dark Four. By the time that came out, the line had really found its footing, and the audience had grown, the community had grown, and they felt like it was time to be able to introduce those types of characters. And it was clearly the right decision, because since that time, we've continued to see just incredible growth in the amount of toy fans that are collecting these.
And then from the beginning, have they always had the like collector friendly, like you said, with the customizing, it's super easy to like swap parts, but even with the packaging, like it's not like these retro cards, like you have to like cut them out or destroy the packaging. The packaging is super easy to like slide right out, and you would never know that it was opened.
Yep. Yeah. The secret to that is everyone that works there is a collector. When we do toy shows, I mean, we're at the table, we run the table. So the people creating the toys and doing the sculpting and doing the marketing, we're all at that table. And then as soon as the line dies down, we take turns going to run the show to go buy stuff.
Yeah.
So when you have a line that's being created by people that are genuinely toy fans, you get cool stuff like that. You get decisions where they're like, hey, I would love this to be able to, be super easy to put in and out, put it back in the package, and it feel like, you didn't destroy the whole display. That's where that stuff comes from, trying to constantly do more for the community, more for the fans, do the things that we'd love to see.
And then you had kind of mentioned I've got one of my like Masters of the Universe inspired figures here.
Bryophytus, yep.
Do you guys have, I don't know, maybe you can't say, but do you guys have plans to do more inspired figures like that, maybe outside of Masters of the Universe?
Or does that kind of just generate, I guess, maybe as you develop them or think of, that'd be cool?
The Powercon debut figures started for a few reasons. The studio has a long history with that property. So that's why that makes sense. Those started because they were going out to the Powercon show and they wanted something that specific audience would enjoy seeing. We do see a lot of requests for, are you going to do Star Wars tributes now that you have Cosmic Legions? You should do Dragon Ball Z tributes or whatever. We see a lot of that stuff. It doesn't really make sense for the studio to do that. They don't have the type of connection to those properties that they have to Masters. And, that was doing the Powercon things. That was something that those characters can still live firmly in the realm of Mythos, but be a fun little nod to, one of those other characters. So again, I never want to say, no, we will never do that.
Sure.
But I don't think that it's really something that the studio's excited for. At the end of the day, the studio's excited for putting out our own ideas and our own custom characters, our own creations. So going and doing whole bunches of tribute figures to existing properties is not really what gets them up in the morning.
Okay.
I will say this, they still do a lot of work for other companies. So that itch to be able to work on, Thundercats or The Simpsons or, you name it, all these other properties, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, they get to do that through their work with other toy companies, the sculpting work they do, the development work they do with them. So they still get to scratch that itch without having to leak all of that into the in-house lines.
Gotcha. Okay. Are there any dream figures that you have, like whether that's like an inspired figure or just like a Mythic Legion specific figure? Because I know you do tons of customs, so maybe you don't even have, you just make your own dream figures, but
to an extent I do, there's a funny story for that. So when I've been customizing for years, and when I first got started, I was just, adding parts from other toy lines onto Mythic Legions. Because when I first started doing this, the customizing community was not what it is today. Today, there are multiple providers doing, 3D printed parts that allow you to create almost anything you want for these Mythic Legions figures. It was very different back then. So the first one that I created, I really wanted to do, I always loved the animal characters. I really wanted to do a fox, a kitsune, which is Japanese for fox. So I wanted to do a kitsune character. I could not find a good fox head to use. I remember looking at like a rocket raccoon and being like, can I make this into a fox? Is that close enough? And it looked like an orange rocket raccoon. It was stupid. So that was my first custom project like that, where I worked with an artist named Walter DeMarco, who I was friendly with, who he enjoyed my work and said, hey, I'd love to do a project with you, sculpt something for you. I did a fox specifically for myself. And I hooked up with a friend of mine named Len LaGuardia, who runs a company called Wolf King Customs. At the time, Wolf King Customs didn't exist. I just asked him to print me it up, and he said, hey, I think other people would like this. You mind if I sell some? And I was like, yeah, dude, if other people would enjoy this, go ahead. And that really opened the door to doing all these custom parts. Now I still work with Wolf King. I help run Legion Shop, which is, a community of artists creating custom parts for the Legions lines. But it's funny because there was a broadcast we did with Horsemen Studios for the Alethea wave, and there's a character in that wave named Krotos. He's like a satyr type figure, kind of like a ram type head. And Eric Treadaway actually said on the broadcast that originally that character was meant to be a fox, but right around the time he was getting started, he saw my fox characters and was like, well, I guess I'm not going to do that. He didn't tell me that like privately. He told me that on a live broadcast to the world. And I was like, oh, you have to be kidding me. I literally stepped on Eric's toes. And it ended up working up fine. The satyr character ended up working up really well. But yeah, it's definitely interesting being able to create these customs, but now also being able to help in some small way influence the actual figures that get produced. Obviously the Legions Con figures. So we have a set coming out this year at Legions Con called the Furious Four. That's a 2-pack of these characters we call the Fury Clan. I was able to basically put those characters together, put those designs together. So being able to do that and have them actually get released is super, super cool. But to answer your question, are there any like wish list characters I have? I grew up playing Dungeons and Dragons. That's a big part of the reason I love Mythic Legions. That's like really my touch point with high fantasy like this. So I continue to get excited when we get new character classes. Like most of what we've gotten so far are heavily armored characters. So with the Alethea wave, we finally got like leather boots and leather gloves. So being able to make like thieves and characters with lighter armor, I get super excited for that. The easy thing to say that I'm looking forward to is the dragon. They've been teasing a giant 3-foot dragon for years. Every time we have anyone at the studio, they're like, where's the dragon? Where's the dragon? I want a dragon too. I think that would be super cool. I don't know where the heck I'd put it, but it's a problem I'm willing to have. So those are some of the things I would love to see. But I will say this too. I also love to be surprised. I also love when Eric throws something out there that's totally unexpected, that I don't imagine being in the line, and then it just works for some reason. So I like both of those.
Yeah, that's an interesting point too, of that point of going from a fan to working. Does that kind of take away some of the mystery of what's going to come out next, or kind of having the inside line with some of that stuff, which is probably interesting. As far as looking at, like, you talked about some future projects, of course, you have those dragons, or you mentioned like video game, things like that. is there anything you're working on right now, or that's like, this is real exciting, or this is something that I guess gets you real excited to be working on?
I mean, everything. So I I get asked quite frequently if being on the inside has diminished
Mm-hmm.
kind of the coolness factor of reveals, and I always say no, not at all, because there's still a point where I see it for the first time.
Yeah.
Like, you know, that's so there's still that immediate like, oh my goodness, that looks so good. Now I get to see more of the progress, which is super cool. I get to make comments on that, and in some cases help, you know, direct decisions on some of that stuff, which is super, super cool whenever you know, I get a small ability to do any of that stuff. I love that. But I'm one of those people that, like, I love to give gifts around the holidays. Yeah, I like getting gifts. Everybody likes getting gifts, but I like getting something really cool and really like appropriate for somebody that I love and giving it to them and seeing their face. So with Mythic Legions, I kind of get to do that. Like, I get to look at these figures and I get to help decide, how are we going to present this to the world? How are we going to launch this line? Where's it going to be? How are we going to communicate this? What's our approach? You know, when we launched the Cosmic Legions line last year, that rollout was really, really intentional. The way that we did that, the way that we did a slow burn, teasing a bunch of photos that were heavily kind of shadowed so you couldn't see the characters, and then leading up to that big reveal special, that was something that I absolutely got to help drive. That's exciting. So any bit of excitement that may be lost by seeing it early is replaced 10 times over by being able to now present that to other fans as well and see their reactions to it. To answer your other question about, is there anything cool we're working on? I mean, the big thing right now is just this week, we announced the next Mythic Legions wave, which is Mythic Legions All-Stars 5+. So another cool thing that this company does and this line does that a lot of other toy companies don't is we have this program called All-Stars, where we literally let the fans vote on previously released figures that are going to be reissued. So figures that have been sold out for 5-6 years, new versions getting redone. And when I say new versions, I don't mean like 2.0 versions. I mean new production releases of those figures that they may be missing. So this is the latest one of those waves. We announced that it's going to have 3 different All-Stars figures, you know, reissues that were voted on by fans. We did the voting earlier this year. 2 Powercon figures, but the Powercon debut figures will be available as well. And then the wave is also going to have some brand new stuff that nobody has seen. Brand new figures. That's why we're calling it All-Stars 5+. So that's super cool. We're doing like a month-long rollout of that, where different creators are going to get reveals, and they're going to be able to put it on their YouTube channel or their Instagram page or whatever. And then of course the studio will follow up and we'll post all of that on our official channels as well. But that's the most immediate thing that we're working on that's coming out. That's super, super cool. And then of course, as we end the year, like we've done for the last few years, we'll have the epic, what we call Mythic Weekend, which is, you know, our Intern for a Day experience, our G-Con broadcast, where we will launch the next huge Mythic Legions wave, Necronominus, that 4th Horseman that I was talking about. And then if that wasn't cool enough, as soon as we come down off the high of that reveal, we all get to hang out together for 2 days at Legions Con. So that's, working on that is incredibly exciting. I cannot wait to see everybody in November in New Jersey.
All right, so some questions off of what you've just said. And maybe these are going to be too specific, but the dragon, I imagine, like you said, 3 foot. I imagine that's kind of like a HasLab Sentinel Galactus. And is that going to be like articulated dragon that's maybe around the same price point, or is that?
So I don't have anything to reveal about that yet. Sure. You know, all that we say, fans have been asking for a dragon forever, and you know, we've long said, yeah, the desire is there. We definitely would love to do a dragon. You know, we've had fans say, oh, do it as a builder figure, which is a horrible idea. Build-A-Figures, I mean, you're still going to tool all the parts, still costs all that. You're just putting all of that cost into the regular figures, and you're making everyone spend a lot more money on the regular figures so they can get like part of the tail of a dragon. That's I doubt that would be how it gets revealed. There are no plans that I can reveal at this point for a dragon. All I can say is what's been said many times is, yeah, we all would love to see a dragon. It's got to be the right time for the line. It's got to be the right time for the community. And we've got to figure out exactly how we're going to execute on it. Because something of that size, there's a number of challenges, you know, in how you engineer it and how you ship it, all those things. So got to figure out all those things before that would be an actual, you know, real product that could be solicited.
Sure. And then for those con exclusives, like you said, Powercon and Legions Con figures, are those ever available to the general public? Like, we're not super close to the cons. Could we get those figures, or how does that work?
So the Powercon debut figures, those are part of the All-Stars wave. So what we've done in the past years, you just held up the Bryophytus figure. So last year at Powercon, if you went to Powercon, you could buy that there in person months before it shipped to everybody else. So we don't call them Powercon exclusives because they're not exclusive. They're debuts. That's where they make their debut. The figures that are available at that show are always part of another wave that's available for pre-order. With Legions Con, it's a little bit different. With Legions Con, the versions that are available at the show are slightly different. And by slightly different, they have parts in there that the standard release will not have. So we have the Legions Con this year is 2 days. There's one figure on the Saturday, another figure set on the Sunday. The Saturday is this like winged kind of demon called a Daith the Unknown One. It's like a death spirit type character. If you look at the pictures on our website, there's a skeleton head that is only available in the con version. The Furious 4 2-pack, that set, it's going to be a 2-pack set that has a red cat head and tail. It's actually got 5 total heads in the package, but the cat head and tail will only be in the show version. Now, for both of these, after the con, there will be a small number of con versions that will be sold at legionshop.com, but then there will be a wider release of what we call the standard edition. So the 2-pack, instead of it being 2 figures in 1 pack, we'll break them out and they'll be single carded type figures. We did that last year. So last year at Legions Con was the first time we did a show figure, and it totally blew me away, but they honored me by creating a character called Sir Girard. So they had called me earlier in the year, like last March, they had reached out to me and they had said, hey, we want to do, you know, a figure specifically for Legions Con. We want to call it Sir Girard as a thank you for the work that you've done over the years for the line. So I was genuinely blown away, but even cooler, because as cool as it is to have my name on a package, what was even cooler for me was they said, what do you want it to be? You get to design it. So the Sir Girard figure, which is kind of looks like a Templar commander. You've seen the Templar figures, the white with the red cross. Sir Girard is black with a red cross. And I made him a changeling. I made him a character that can change forms. And I did that to be funny because I love customizing. So the fact that he's a changeling and you can pop any head on it and you can be like, hey, it's canon. That's what he looks like. I made the ultimate, what we call LBC or Lazy Boy custom. But that figure was first available at the show. And then later on, a few months later, it was offered on Store Horseman as a regular edition release. Now, last year, there was a skeleton head in that pack that was only supposed to be for the con version. The factory messed up and actually included it in the standard version as well. A lot of fans think that we did that intentionally. It literally was a mistake. The invoice from the factory literally said Sir Girard 1-head version, and they put 2 heads in it. But fans got lucky. It's a mistake that the fans all benefited from. But to answer your question, yeah, the Legions Con figures, those characters will be available at the show, online after, and then a standard edition will be available next year in a bit more of a wider release.
Okay, so then prepare me for what I would expect if I'm going to Legion Con, or if I'm getting it on the store Horseman after Legion Con. Am I like camping out the night before? There's enough for everybody to go around. I'm refreshing the page at midnight.
So I can tell you based on last year's Legions Con, there were a lot of fans that were really worried that we were going to sell out of figures at the show and they were going to be left in the dust. Yeah. We have enough that everyone who's coming to Legions Con will get one if they want it. And actually they can get two. So especially with the Furious 4 2-pack, if you want to make all 4 of the characters that are in that pack, that it's based on a podcast. It's a group of guys from a podcast called My Wife Is Going to Kill Me. Oh, so those, if you want to make their 4 kind of tribute characters, you're going to need 2 of the 2-packs. They are limited to 2 per person. So you can do that. Okay. The amount that we have at the show will satisfy the amount of people we can actually bring in. Like we'll sell out of tickets before we sell out of the figures to supply those tickets. Okay. Then we will have some overflow. So if you go to the con both days, you got to go because there's one on Saturday, one on Sunday. So if you want both sets, you do have to go both days. But you get in line, you will absolutely be able to get your figure. The show version figures that are offered online after, those will go fast. Last year, we sold out of the Sir Girard stock in about 90 seconds. Wow. We said it was going to go for sale this day at 3:00, and they just flew. Now, the standard version, that was available on Store Horseman. That we had up, I think it was limited to 12 per person, the standard Sir Girard, and it took about 24 hours to sell out. So that went a lot slower. I mean, at the end of the day, we want fans to have access to these toys, but we also, Legions Con is something special. You know, the Legions community is like no other. And we know that when fans come together and they meet like-minded fans and they interact with the incredible artists that are part of this community and they spend time with members of the studio, they are more connected to the brand. So we want fans to come out. Well, we want to also reward them. We want them to come out. I mean, when you go to a toy con, you want to walk away with something new and exclusive and something that's unique that you got there for the first time. So we're trying to appease all of those needs. We don't want to shut people out. I think anybody last year that really wanted a Sir Girard was able to get one. And that's the goal with these as well, to be able to get them into the community's hands while still giving con attendees something special that they can enjoy.
Cool. All right. So then, like, now outside of cons, how does a normal person like Jordan, who doesn't quite have a Mythic Legion yet, how does he go about getting his Mythic Legions?
Okay, so the model that we've used since day one is a pre-order model, which has its pluses and minuses, right? You were talking about, do I have to camp out? Do I have to, refresh the page? All of that. We've all done that for drops before, and it kind of sucks, right? The nice thing about the pre-order model is you don't have to worry about items selling out. We tell fans with All Stars 5 Plus, we have told fans, hey, the pre-order is going to start, Friday, July 29th. We haven't announced the end date yet, but all of our pre-orders are usually between 4 and 10 weeks. Smaller waves, we usually do a smaller window. Larger waves, we do a larger window to give people more time to budget for what they want. It doesn't matter whether you buy minute one or whether you buy right before we close the pre-order, which, by the way, a surprising number of people do. A surprising number of people like to play pre-order roulette and basically just wait until it's about to stop so they can get their order in. Bless those people. But it doesn't matter when you order, you're guaranteed the figures. So the downside is you got to wait. You got to wait for them to be produced. Depending on the wave and depending on what's going on in the world, the wait can be anywhere from 6 to 18 months. We always are working to try to shorten that window, but that's that's a general guide. Now, this is how we've operated since the beginning. Interestingly, a lot of other toy companies we've seen adopt that model as of late. And I'm not saying that, oh, they're copying us. It's a good model. It's a good model. I mean, it's no secret. Other people discover it and they're like, hey, there's actually a lot of benefit to this. So if you want to get in on Mythic Legions, I always tell people, number one, get in on the pre-orders. Storehorsemen.com. That's our e-commerce site. You can get there right from our main website, which is sourcehorsemen.com. But you go to storehorsemen.com and we have a pre-order. You are guaranteed to get the figures and you're going to pay the lowest amount possible for the figures. That's the bottom price, the rock bottom price that you're going to pay. Just got to wait a little while for it. If you want something now, if you're looking, I want to get some stuff now, we do have a large family of retailers across the entire world. So we have retailers all over the place. They not only do pre-orders as well, but they also tend to do in-stock items. So if you go to some of those retailers, and on our website, if you go to sourcehorsemen.com/retailers, you can see a partial list of the retailers we have. A lot of them have product on their site right now. Now, you're going to pay a little bit more. For instance, a standard Mythic Legions figure is $37 normally during a pre-order. From one of our approved retailers, you're going to pay $49.99. So there is a little bit more of an expense there, but that's a way that you can get stuff now. We do shows all the time as well. You know, I mentioned Powercon. We're going to be out at Powercon August 5th through 7th. If you come to the shows, we have product on our tables as well. But another great way that I always tell people is get involved in the community. So there is a Facebook group called the Mythic Legions Cabal. And I know Facebook's not everyone's cup of tea, totally get that. But if you are so inclined and you are on Facebook, this is a great group of Mythic Legions fans who really, if you've been a longtime toy collector and you get into this group, I guarantee you're going to be like, wow, this is some of the friendliest, most welcoming group of toy fans I have ever seen. I've seen incredibly cool people hook other fans up on there, sell them stuff at great prices to get them going, to get them started with their collection. So there's a variety of ways that you can get started. That's just a few of the suggestions that I would have for a new fan looking to get into it.
Okay. And then, so it's mainly pre-order or these sites.
Yeah.
Is there ever a chance that we see Mythic Legions on like a retailer shelf, like Target, Walmart, anything like that?
So, I mean, we would love to be in more stores. I don't know that some of those giant big boxes like Target and Walmart are the best spot for the line. You know, when you talk about retail like that, there's limited shelf space. And they would rather put figures from the new Thor movie on the shelf than Mythic Legions, which I totally get. I totally get that mentality. Not to say that that wouldn't be super cool, but I would love to see these in more retail locations. You know, we have a number of our retailers are brick and mortar shops where you can walk in and you can see rows of these things, and seeing these things in a retail style display is incredibly cool. I mean, look, I still get incredibly nostalgic when I see people post like old photos of Toys R Us and stuff, or KB Toys, and I see those toy aisles. I immediately am transported back to that environment, to toy hunting. I love being able to pre-order stuff and buy things online, but yeah, dude, I miss toy hunting so much. So being able to see these in a retail fashion, I think we'd all love to see. And if any retailers are out there that are interested, hell, reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you.
Nice. So then if the main way is pre-orders, how often or how many times per year do you guys have pre-orders available?
Yeah, so it varies. This year so far, so we, at the start of the year, well, we do also, I will say this, we do also have in-stock sales. So in-stock sales are usually after the product is pre-ordered, after it's arrived, after it's shipped, where we put it on our website and we do sales of items that are actually in the warehouse. Those tend to be the like 30-second sellout type sales that go crazy because we have a limited amount. You know, but at the start of the year, we did a sale, an in-stock sale for a line we called Reinforcements. So Reinforcements was a set of reissues for what we call our Legion Builder figures. So there are different classes of figures in the Mythic Legions line. You know, there's different scales. We have, you know, everything from goblins to dwarves to, you know, humans and elves. Elves are, you know, thinner than a big human barbarian or an orc. But then we have ogres and we have trolls. Now we have brute scale. We have all these different sizes. But even within those sizes, we have different product classes. So our figures are highly detailed, highly sculpted, highly painted. They have wonderful paint applications. We also have these figures we call Legion Builders that are the same kinds of figures, same sculptures, same body parts, just with far fewer paint applications. That allows us to offer them at a lower price point. So I said a standard figure is $37. A Legion Builder is $25. $25, you get one of these figures. It's great for army building. If you want to have an army of Templar Knights, this is a great way that you can do that. If you want to customize these figures because they're less expensive and they have fewer paint apps, they actually act as great bases to customize on top of. So we did a wave earlier this year called Reinforcements that all that stuff was in stock. That was number one. Then we did a pre-order for a Cosmic Legions wave called Grave Knight. That was a short time ago. We just did a pre-order for Mythic Legions All-Stars Trolls, which was just 2 troll figures. Now we have All-Stars 5+. That's going to be pre-order, and it's no secret. Everyone knows we're going to do Necronominus at the end of the year. So that's 5 pre-orders this year right there. I'm not saying there won't be anything else offered this year, but I'm saying that right now, there's 5 obvious ones for this year. And I think that's probably what you're going to see on a normal year, 5 to 6 type of pre-orders, and then some surprises tossed in the mix.
Okay. And then I guess kind of going back to like creative process, and I guess I'm curious on the Figura Obscura, like how did you guys decide on Krampus and like where does that line lead to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Figura Obscura is one of the things I am most excited for. That's because that's like, it opens up so many doors. And it was started because Jim Treadaway, again, I've literally found a way to name all the founders and owners, and I didn't mean to do that. It just kind of happened organically. But Jim had suggested doing a holiday themed figure. He wanted to do a figure around the holidays. So Krampus became kind of a fun, obvious character to do. You know, the character of Krampus is kind of had a resurgence in pop culture as of late. And we had a lot of body parts that would work for the character. So if you look at the Krampus figure, it's the only new parts on that figure are the head and like neck fur collar, the tail, and then the accessories that he comes with. So we were able to execute that figure with a minimum amount of new parts needed, which was, you know, very important. When that figure was first created, the idea was that we weren't going to announce it, that we were going to do it as an in-stock item. So we had them in the warehouse and it was just going to be a surprise drop. We sent an email to our mailing list the day before, just letting them know that there was going to be a surprise the next day to be ready for it. And then we launched the figure and fans went crazy for it. They loved it. Interestingly, up until that figure was in the warehouse, the name Figura Obscura didn't exist. We didn't think about how we were going to do this. Like, we didn't have this idea that it was going to become a third line that we were going to support above, you know, Mythic and Cosmic Legions. It was literally just, this will be a fun figure to do. Like, this will be cool. Krampus, I mean, they could have made him like a weird northern demon part of Mythic Legions, but they wanted to do something that didn't have to be tied into our property. They wanted to do a figure that exists, lore and mythology wise in our real world. So that's where it came from. And then it was me that said, well, where do I put this on the website? Because I'm approaching it super practical, and I'm like, where do I dump this? Do I dump it in Mythic? I'm clearly not dumping it in Cosmic.
Right.
And that's what started the conversation around, oh, well, let's make a whole new category for it. And Cornboy suggested the name Figura Obscura, which kind of means like secret figure, because that was a big part of the idea, was these are going to be things that people do not expect, and they're going to catch them by surprise. So that's where it started. But the reaction to that figure, I mentioned, the Powercon debuts, how that's a great entry point. The Krampus was an incredible entry point for so many new fans, because they knew who Krampus was, and they saw it and they said, that thing is super cool. I'm going to buy that. That's going to go with my Christmas decorations. They bought it and they were like, oh, wow, are these what Mythic Legions figures are like? And yes, they are, because it's basically a Mythic Legions figure. It's a total Mythic body. And then that opened the door for them to start getting other figures. So it's another great entry point. But I got excited because after the success of Krampus, we got to sit down and talk about other Figura Obscura characters we could make. And that brainstorming session, throwing out all these different ideas, that was super cool. And it was literally like the shackles were off, because you didn't have to say, well, how would that fit in with the lore of Mythic, or how would that fit in with what we're writing for the Cosmic Legion storyline? You literally were like, what would be a cool figure that I would want on my shelf? That's it. And when you think about where are we going to draw these from, fans have already kind of guessed where we're taking this from. Mythology, literature, legends, all these different places in our world that are so rich, that have so much that we could tackle and put our spin on. That is what Figura Obscura is going to be.
Nice. So then with the pre-orders and so we're just getting into this now. Some of those all-stars are giving us those past figures. Are there any figures that are they've decided these are off limits, these are only being made in the past, never again? Or is everything fair game? We could eventually get those figures that now are $300.
There are definitely figures that are off the table. Okay. So we've said before that the Powercon figures are meant to be one and done. So they're never part of the vote for All-Stars.
Okay.
There are other characters, important characters, that haven't been added to the All-Star votes. And that's because there's plans for them. Okay. There's plans to do stuff with them down the road. One of the cool things that we just got to see when we did the campaign for the Mythic Legions Tactics War of the Aetherblade video game last year, one of the rewards you could get was a 2-pack that was a character called Attila Leosir with a character called Gorgo Aetherblade. These are 2 major characters in the lore. They're 2 faction leaders. What was great about this pack was it allowed Eric to go in and say, okay, I've done both of those characters previously. How would I redo them if I wasn't constrained so much by the parts library? If I could sculpt new pieces for them, what would I add to them? So if you look at them, they still very much look like the original versions, but Gorgo has additional sculpting on his armor to make him, even spikier and more evil and so forth. So that idea of doing updated versions of key characters is really exciting as well. So yeah, you're not going to see everything. Even characters that have been All-Stars before, we've traditionally kept out of the All-Star votes. So I would say to people that, every character is not going to be made an All-Star, especially at the point that we're nearing 200 figures. We can only do so many All-Stars, because while it's awesome to reissue old figures, we want new stuff too. Yeah. We have new ideas and new story to present. So finding that balance between giving some of those older figures, but introducing new stuff is important. But inevitably, some stuff's not going to get made.
Okay. And I guess like at least some of the ones kind of how I found Mythic Legions was on Kickstarter. There's still, I think it's the Gothtropolis, like those birds.
Yep.
One, why is that still on Kickstarter taunting me, telling me that I can't have it? And are those ever going to get reissued? So,
I mean, Kickstarter, I don't think they ever take down any past campaigns.
Okay.
So that's why the Gothtropolis was a property that existed prior to Mythic Legions. Will we ever see those birds again? I don't know that we'll ever see those birds specifically.
Okay.
One of the major characters in Mythic Legions is so I mentioned there are the Dark Four, these evil characters that the evil factions are named after. There are actually 4 corresponding heroic beasts that the 4 heroic factions are named after. And one of them, called the Order of Etheron. Etheron is a golden eagle. So there is a bird figure of that character. Fans have long asked for a reissue of Etheron. So we know that they want them. I can't say we'll see more birds, but I would be surprised that we don't see Etheron at some point. And if he makes an appearance, who knows if some of his feathered friends will come as well.
Okay. Any other questions you have, Jordan?
I'm trying to think. Got a lot of collecting to do.
That's true.
Well, I always tell people that I think one of the mistakes that a lot of potential new fans make is they go to the website and they say, the line's too deep, I can't get into it. And I get that, because that collect them all mentality is very, very prevalent in a lot of collectors, the way they actually want to buy these things. And not for nothing, you look at some of those older figures, you're like, that thing is super, super cool. But to me, it's such a shame if someone's like, well, I'm not going to enjoy this line and everything that's coming because I can't get everything that's already happened. I can't think of any toy line that's been out for any period of time that you could jump into today and easily buy every figure in the line. You mentioned Marvel Legends earlier. My goodness, the amount of product coming out from Marvel Legends is staggering. Even if you're 2 years behind trying to backtrack and get all that stuff, just the sheer volume of it would be just a daunting exercise. So what I always tell people that are getting into Mythic Legions collecting is look forward, not backwards. There's so much cool stuff that's coming out for the line. New waves that are going to be solicited, like All-Stars 5+, like Necronominus, but also stuff that has been solicited previously that is on the way to us now. The Mythic Legions Alithia wave is literally on the water from China, going to be arriving any day now in the warehouse. So those are figures that are going to be starting to appear at shows and, on sales, and, retailers are going to have some, and fans are going to be selling and trading them. So those will be in the market. Deluxe Legion Builders is another one. So I tell fans, focus on what you can get now and what the pre-orders are. You're going to get yourself a really nice collection of super cool figures doing that. And then look at the checklist and look at some figures and determine if there are some older characters that you may want to go after. Some of them may be fairly unattainable unless you want to drop some serious money, but many of them are going to be figures that you can hunt down. And as we talked about earlier with the All-Stars program, some of them may come back as a reissue and you can get them that way. Additionally, with Cosmic Legions, that's a super cool thing as well. That's ground floor. So everyone that's like, Mythic Legions is so deep, I don't know if I want to get into it. Cosmic Legions has not even shipped yet. The first Cosmic Legions figures are expected to start shipping out probably at the start of next year. So early 2023. We've solicited one full wave, the first Cosmic Legions wave, which was called Valkatar Book 1, and then the most recent kind of mini wave, which was Valkatar Book 2, Grave Knight. So those figures are also going to be a really cool way to jump into the Legions line. Obviously a very different, tone than Mythic Legions because it's sci-fi versus high fantasy, but same kind of build quality, same compatibility of parts, not only within the Cosmic line, but cross line as well. If you want to take one of those space characters and throw a skeleton head on it, or an orc head on it, or a barbarian head on it, you can totally do that. Or if you want to take one of those alien heads and put it in Mythic Legions and make it some weird eldritch type demon, you can do that as well. All of those possibilities are out there. So it's a great time to jump into the line. It's a great community, and I think they're great figures. And based on the feedback we have gotten, I think our fans feel that as well.
Yeah, that was something we talked about, is just the collector friendly nature of it, of saying, kind of as you were talking about earlier, you don't necessarily, it's not like, hey, go out and you have to buy the whole line. You can kind of pick and choose. Maybe I want this figure, and oh, maybe I'll get this one. And I think that's a really cool way to reward the fans. You don't make them buy figures that you don't want to get in order to have to complete the line or something. You can just kind of collect, in the same way they're kind of swappable parts on some. Your collection can be very customizable too, which I think is pretty cool.
And there are certain races that are fairly prevalent in the line: orcs, skeletons, goblins, knights. There's a lot of fans that aren't collect them all type collectors, that they're like, what, I really like the skeletons. That's what brought me to the line. That's what I predominantly buy. And they may buy a figure or two here and there beyond that, but they have something of a focus. We see lots of fans that do that. We have our completists. We have plenty of people that are like, I'm buying everything. And then we have plenty of people that, if they collect skeletons, they buy non-skeletons and they put skeleton parts on it. They put a skeleton head on it and they make them skeletons. So it is very much open to, how do you want to collect this line? What is going to work for your display in your collection? And that's important. I don't know how you guys because when I talk to fellow collectors, you get some people that are articulation junkies, that they're just like, I need this thing to have 300 points of articulation. You have other people that are much more into the sculptures, and they'll sacrifice articulation for the sculpture. I think Mythic Legions kind of tries to hit both of those. I'm a sculpture guy. I'm not super double jointed elbows, double jointed knees. I'm always someone that would prefer to see a cleverly hidden joint that has a little less range of motion than a really obvious double joint that I could literally pose any way that I want. I know the photographers really like the range of motion, but I look at the incredible photography being done in the Legions line, and I think, well, you know what? They seem to be hitting the poses they need with these figures. So I like that. I think it works really well, especially if you have any of the knight figures, the way that the armor is designed, where the joints are kind of hidden by pieces of armor. I think it makes for that best of both worlds, where you get some smart articulation and good range of motion while still having a figure that just sculpturally looks so good.
Yeah. And that's what we were talking about too, is even, I guess we've got one figure here, but like the way the head, like it's not just you pop the head off, you pop, the neck comes out. So it's like seamlessly shown, as far as we got people on YouTube, hopefully, who are watching. So Yeah, I think that's a really neat way to integrate both of those things of articulation and attention to detail as well.
Yeah, and I love when I do shows and I get to talk to new fans about the line, because that's often my role at the show is, I'll have other members of the studio that are packing the table and taking the money, and I have the enviable job of staying at the end of the table and being kind of the rah-rah guy. So I meet people and I talk to the crowd. I'm fairly visible out there. I do a YouTube show every Wednesday and stuff. I help with the broadcasts. So people tend to know who I am. And I use that at the shows to meet people and genuinely embrace the community. But I love it because when we do a show, we'll have a line of fans stretching, down the show floor, and, other vendors and people will be like, what the heck is going on over here? Like, and then other toy collectors will come over because, right, we want something hot. So when we go to a show, we see a line stretching down from a table. We're like, I don't know what they're doing, but I want some. Yeah. So they'll come up and they'll say, what's this all about? And one of my favorite things to do, you were talking about popping off the neck and the head. I love it when I explain the line and I talk about the modularity and I pop it apart in front of them because their eyes just like pop and they're just like, what? And I'll pull the hands off and the arms and the legs and the waist. Then I'll grab another figure and I'll swap parts. And it's super cool. We did a show in February in Pennsylvania, and we had a guy who had never heard of the line come up, talk to me for about 15, 20 minutes, bought 4 figures, I think it was, and maybe a wings pack. About an hour later, he gets back in line, and I jokingly said, oh, you're back for more? And he looks at me and he says, I went in the car and I opened the ones I got and we're playing, and I've never had so much fun with toys since I was a kid. These things are beautiful. I had to come in and get more. Came in and bought like 8 more figures.
That's awesome.
That day, he hadn't even heard of Mythic Legions, got in line because he saw the line, and then walked away with a grand total of like 12 figures in a wings pack. If that doesn't speak to the kind of quality of how these things are when they're in your hands, I don't think anything does.
Right. So I guess the technical question for you.
Yeah.
With like popping them all apart, like I knew that you could take them apart, but I'm new to that idea and I'm scared. So is there a certain way I should, like, the heads are pretty obvious, like that's pretty normal, but like with the waist, I've tried pulling it apart. It doesn't quite come off as easy as the head.
Yep.
I just need to be a little stronger with it.
Yes. So one thing I will say is this, is when you feel resistance, don't keep going.
Okay.
Feel resistance, stop. You don't want to break it.
Right.
They are meant to come apart, but certain pieces, a little bit of heat is going to go a long way. Okay. So the heads, you're right, are super, super easy. The necks are super easy. The shoulder armor is super easy. When you start getting into the waist, what I find with the waist is if you grab the figure, grab one right here. If you grab the figure, and instead of trying to lift up, if instead you kind of lift it to the side, okay, it pops like that. Gotcha. So if you lift it over to the side, it just pops out, and you'll see it's literally like a ball, right, and then a hole there. So if you pop those together without the waist piece, you can see there's like a little gap there. That's what you're actually doing when you pull it apart, is you're just sliding it off that ball. Okay. This ball right here is an incredibly strong joint. I've done like 500 customs. I've never broken one of these balls. So other pieces like, the hands or the lower arms, those might get a little more challenging. Some of the newer figures, the plastic is actually even more malleable and it's pretty easy. But I always tell people, if you have any trouble, get a hairdryer. Get a little hairdryer, blow that section for 30 seconds. It's going to soften the plastic enough that you can pop it right apart. Okay. No problem at all.
And that's like every joint, like ankles, knees, elbows, like those are all separate, or it depends on the figure maybe.
They all pretty much pop apart in an incredible amount of ways. Okay. Hands at the wrists, the lower gauntlets, the lower arms, the upper arms, you can pop it at the shoulders, you got your torso, your neck and your neck collar, you've got the waist, you've got it depends on the legs. The knight have like hips and then an upper leg. The skeletons just have an upper leg. So it depends on the figure. But at the knees, at the ankle, and then actually the foot has an ankle peg that pops out as well if you wanted to put different feet on.
Okay.
There's an article on Source Horseman. And by the way, we mentioned Source Horseman. Anyone who's starting to get into it, if you go to the website sourcehorseman.com, there is a link for Mythic Legions. There's a page called Mythic Legions 101 that will literally be like, hey, just getting started, this is what you need to know. But there's also a section called updates, and there's a blog in there. We post blog articles every single week. It's a mixture of lore articles, figure in focus, but there's actually a bunch of interviews with customizers and community members. But there's also some like FAQ articles in there that are great for new fans and new customizers. There's actually one in there called "How Do You Pop Apart Mythic Legions?" that shows literally a blown apart view of a couple different figures. So looking at that, you can see I literally took a figure, took every piece that I could off, and then shot a photo of it to say, this is a totally blown apart look. Okay. So that's a great resource for you to be able to see. And honestly, if you Google the words, how do you pop apart Mythic Legions, it'll bring you right to that article.
Okay.
Very cool. Know. Yeah. And that's what's interesting is a lot of our podcasts and other times we've talked a lot about Legends and different DC or Black series, like you've mentioned. And we're trying to, sort of, because we're involved in a lot of, you'd mentioned Facebook groups, we're part of a lot of different groups, and definitely wanting to kind of just explore more of all the lines that are out there. And like, I think there's a lot of possibilities and a lot of unique things you can do with Mythic Legions that, you can't really do or necessarily get with other toy lines. So
yeah. Absolutely.
I was wondering too, like, how do the fans feel? Like you'd mentioned, like using parts again, and I feel like coming from Marvel Legends, like I feel like I see in those Facebook groups all the time, they're like, oh my gosh, can we get rid of this Bucky Cap mold? Or they don't like those reuses. But I've never seen that with Mythic Legions. They're much more like they like that?
Well, we get both. I think people know that that's kind of part of the line, that reuse of parts is something that's been there since day one. Mm-hmm. We're actually seeing more and more new parts added to the line. I mentioned the Aerother wave, the Alithia wave, and the Poxus wave. Those three large waves introduced a staggering amount of new body parts and new tooling. And every time the library expands, there's new pieces that we can make use out of. Mm-hmm. There's always going to be people that are like, oh, we're seeing the same torso again. We're seeing the same head again. But it's minimal. I think most fans know that that's part of the line, and there's enough new stuff coming that they don't feel like it's overdone. There was a point where it was heavy, because in the early days of the line, it was such a different time period where the success of the line now allows us to do more stuff.
Yeah.
If we look at the figures and the amount that were being sold in those earliest waves, they pale in comparison to these newer waves. So it's no big surprise here. At the end of the day, this is a business. We're trying to make figures. We want to sell as many figures as possible, not only because that's what we're in the business to do, but genuinely as toy fans who want to do more. The more success we have, the more risks we can take and the more things we can do. So doing a wave that's got super heavy tooling that really significantly adds to the cost of producing that wave, that is so much easier to do now with the kinds of numbers that are being put out there than it was earlier in the line. So when you look at some of those earlier waves, you're going to see a lot more parts reuse than I think you see today because of that success and because of the expansion of the library.
Okay. And then looking forward to the lines, so we've got the three main ones now. I guess maybe within those lines or other lines, do we see like maybe pirates or mummy Egyptian type things? Or, I mean, we've got the future, we've got the past.
Well, obviously with Figura Obscura, that's wide open. So who knows what we could see in there? That's everything that you name is a possibility for that. But in the Mythic Legions line, there have been other kind of real world historical influences that have cropped up. Obviously, there's the Templars. There's characters that we have called the Mercurians that have that Spartan-like looking helmet. So those are two examples of real world warriors that have had a bit of an influence in there. We've had a lot of people say they'd love to see characters that have more of an Asian samurai-like influence. In the Paxos wave, we had a character that was more like Indian style descent. So seeing some of those other cultural influences influence the design of the characters, yeah, that's totally something that we could do. And when you mention something like pirates, that's not really cultural, but it's just a kind of character. Well, if you look at the map of Mythos, there's quite a bit of water on that map. I have to imagine that there's probably some scallywags,
nice,
around those waters. So all that stuff I think is cool. And again, that's one of the neat things about a fantasy line like this that is an open IP is you can bring in a lot of those things. You can say like, you know what? I want to do this type of character. And then once those parts are introduced, it opens up the ability not only for customizers to take some fun with it, but for future figures to come that use those same parts. Because anything that gets tooled is probably going to get reused in some fashion.
Okay, cool. And then I think wrapping up, do you have a single favorite figure out of everything that's been made?
So the easy answer is Sir Girard.
Right, that's what I say, Sir Girard.
But when I am asked this question and I say, well, I can't choose Sir Girard, the one that I tend to go towards is a Gorgo Etherblade. He's the figure that got me into the line. He's a black armored knight that's got like antlers coming off his helmet. And I remember when I first saw that figure in the original Kickstarter, he looked just so wicked and so evil. Something about the antlers on his helmet, I immediately was like, I've got to have that figure. At first, I thought it was going to be 4-inch, and I don't collect 4-inch, but I was going to get just that figure because I thought it looked that cool. So when I realized they had upped it to 7-inch, I was thrilled. Nice. I'm super excited for the second version, the one that's coming out with that 2-pack I mentioned. So he would probably be my figure that I'm excited for.
Awesome. Cool. And then last up, is there anything else you had that you wanted to like plug specifically for our listeners?
Well, before I plug anything, I've plugged along the way. So I'm curious. So you said that you've got a couple figures so far.
Yes.
Who's your favorite figure that you've purchased thus far from Mythic Legions?
All right. So I got 2 of them in the mail today. So that's why you have to forgive me. I don't know their names very well yet. Right. But the red guy up here,
that's Belphegor.
Got him today. He's pretty cool because I got the red wings, and people that listen to the podcast, you probably know, like, if it's got wings or a gun for an arm, I'm all over it. So he's probably my favorite that I've opened so far. But then I've got this Taurian.
Taurian, yeah, great figure.
I love Minotaurs, so I think once I open him, he's gonna be a run for first. But then also, like,
I like the skeleton guy.
Yeah, so, Scaphoid.
Scaphoid. I was surprised. Like, he was the first one that I opened. So, and like looking at the detail on his armor is crazy. Yeah. And then I got the deluxe
The orc. Yep.
He was one that like I got him because he was kind of on that cheaper side entry level price range. But even him, I'm pretty like I love his swords. I think he looks amazing.
So that one there, that's that Legion builder I was talking about. And I even tell fans, you know, if you're ready to get into customizing, grab a Legion builder and compare the body of the Legion builder to like the bodies of regular figures. You're going to notice the exact same sculpture, just with no paint details. You know what? Start by painting the details. Paint some of those little, that strip in the middle. Get a little brush and paint like the little rivets and stuff on the armor. It's a great place to start, and a little bit actually adds so much to that. But you've got a nice little mix of figures to start with there. My follow-up question would be, as you've been looking at the checklist, which figure would be high on your wish list of, oh my goodness, that's the one that I want?
So like, I don't know what it is about birds, but I like birds for some reason. So that's why I brought up the Gothtropolis earlier. But there's the Eagleus that I think looks pretty cool. Other than, I feel like I need a knight now that I've got some of these other like skeletons, more mythical creatures, orcs. So I feel like a knight would make the most sense. And I like the Templar knight look.
Well, I'll tell you this. So in Mythic Legions, we talked about there's 4 heroic factions, 4 evil factions. There's actually 2 other factions that are, we call the splinter factions. Those are my favorite, by the way, because they're like the House of the Noble Bear, which is all the barbarians, and Sons of the Red Star, which Sir Girard is part of. Those are all the mercenaries and cutthroats. So they're the 2 neutral-ish factions. Then you've got the evil and the good. Now, every heroic faction has a corresponding evil faction that they go against. So that's why if you look at the Erethyr wave, it was the Legion of Erethyr versus the army of Laodiceus. The Alithia wave is Alithia's Brood versus Zylona's Flock. Circle of Poxes versus Convocation of Basilia. That brings us to the wave coming up at the end of this year, which is the Order of Etheron versus the Congregation of Necronominus. Now, those are literally the Knights and the Skeletons, which are 2 of the most popular character types in the wave. So if you like those, there is going to be some super, super cool stuff coming. I think that by the end of the year, people are going to just lose their mind over what is coming out with this wave. As a fan since the beginning, I'm looking at this wave and people make fun of me because every time a new big wave comes out, I'm always like, this is the best wave they've ever done. Everyone makes fun of me and they're like, you always say that. I'm like, it's because it's always true.
Right.
They keep improving. They keep learning and improving. So you're going to have plenty of cool stuff coming up by the end of the year. I guarantee you.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, is like, I haven't really seen many that I'm like, oh, that one I could totally pass on. Like there's the tiers of like, I really want, like I said, that Eagleus, the Templar Knight, like even like something as simple as like that moose that's coming out. That looks cool. I don't have any other mooses.
Moose is cool. I saw the moose today. That's cool looking moose.
It is so big. When you see the antlers, we've taken pictures where we put like dwarves in the antlers.
Oh goodness.
It is so big, and it's a perfect example of what the success of the line has done, because that was a passion project. That was Eric literally being like, I really want to do a moose, like a full-size, ridiculous, giant moose, and being able to say like, you know what, we're going to do that. And fans loved it. That figure was so popular because, like you said, there's nothing else out there like it.
Right.
People dig it.
Yeah, so I'm hoping there's some of those that become in stock on some of those retailers. That Centaur is another one. Love Centaurs.
That wave is what's going to be coming out now, so keep your eyes open. In terms of plugging, the one thing that I will tell everybody is we hope to see you at Legions Con. So Legions Con, we've mentioned it a few times. Legions Con is an annual event. We're going to be in our 4th year this year. It is the first time we've actually done it on its own. When we first started in 2019, it was kind of an after party as part of another Toy Con. 2020, we had to go virtual because of the pandemic. And then last year, we did it as a one-day show that was once again kind of tacked on to a larger toy show in New Jersey. It's grown so much that this year it is a full 2 days. It's November 5th and 6th. It's being held in Secaucus, New Jersey. So it's kind of right on the New York, New Jersey border, literally about 20 minutes from the Newark airport in New Jersey, not too far from JFK in New York. It's 2 full days of just all things Legions. We're going to have a ballroom filled with not only Horsemen Studios and the Legions Con figures, but artists, photographers, 3D printers and sculptors, customizing painters, other toy companies selling Mythic Legions and a lot more, diorama creators, you name it, they are going to be there. Independent toy companies, we've got a number of other toy companies. You know, it's an amazing time right now for companies who are not the Mattels and Hasbros of the world to put out their own ideas. We have a number of them that are going to be at the show exhibiting. We've got breakout rooms for different sessions throughout the day. Parties at night is an absolutely incredible experience to be part of. You can get all the information on that at legionscon.com. That's again, legionscon.com. Hopefully you guys heard that. I have a super Northeast accent sometimes. So I know that when I do podcasts, sometimes people are like, what the hell is he saying? Is that accent is so thick. But yeah, that's what I would plug. I hope to see you there. It is going to be an absolutely incredible time.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I hope we can get out there. I think we're trying to plan on the New York Comic-Con in October. So then the next month we just come on back out to New Jersey.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
Where are you guys located, if you don't mind me asking?
So I'm in Wisconsin.
I'm in Iowa normally, Des Moines.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So
that's not too bad. We've actually got a couple people coming from Wisconsin. So
okay.
There you go.
Nice. You're gonna have to link up with them.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Very cool.
that'd be awesome. I thank you for taking the time to educate us on all things Legion.
happy to do it.
Hope our fans learned something here. I'm sure they did, and they're going to be scouring, looking for more Legions. I know that's pretty much what I do now.
If you want to see more of my stuff, by the way, you can follow me personally on Instagram. My tag on Instagram is at Mythic Customs. That's what I go by. So I still post custom action figures, custom Mythic Legions there all the time. And certainly your audience as well. If you have any questions about Legions, reach out to me. I'm always happy to answer those questions.
Yeah, your customs are super cool. I scrolled through there and I hope they take some inspiration from some of your figures and make those into ones that we can pre-order too, because awesome. I love the animal figures. So
you and me both.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Nice
Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you both. You have a good rest of your night.
Yes,
you too. Bye-bye. And that is going to do it for the Strong Collectors podcast today. We hope that you enjoyed this interview with Jeremy Girard. Like we said, go follow him on all of the social platforms, especially Instagram. See all those cool pictures that he's posting. He's super active in the Facebook group, the Mythic Legions Cabal. So if you're interested in getting into collecting this line, that's a great place to go. And then make sure that you're like, share, subscribe, do all the great things for this podcast. Get it out there. Let everybody know what's up with Mythic Legions. Let them know how to collect it if they're interested. And we hope, like we said, this is a good beginner's guide and we give you all that information that you need. So, and with that being said, stay strong.